we're going to go into a period of questions and answers, and I'm going to start the ball rolling. We've got some quite heavyweight questions here for everybody on the panel. I just wanted to start the ball rolling with a couple of specific questions just to, I know that Carl has been answering some of the questions within the Q&A facility, so please go and refer to answers there. But first question goes to Anne about the well-being of younger people shielding and whether that mirrors actually what might be happening for also for those people who are not shielding of a similar age group.
Yeah, thanks, Nick. Yes, it is the short answer. That there have been a number of studies that have been tracking over the pandemic well-being, and generally speaking, younger people and women are faring worse in terms of well-being. There are all sorts of reasons why that may be the case. And you know, we could go into those if we had more time, but the short answer is yes, it does track.
Okay, thank you. And another relatively easy one while the panel's preparing for Rebecca, actually, in terms of was the sampling just registered nurses or were pre-registered nurses and pre-registrant nurses redeployed from the HAI? They were redeployed from the HAI training providers.
Yes, we're looking at all nurses, so registered and pre-registered nurses in this study.
Okay, thank you very much. So they were the easy ones. Probably the most tweetable thing has come out of the afternoon was innovation without research is much easier. So I'm just wondering about whether we could just explore that across the panel, and we'll obviously dip our toes into the non-prioritization of nursing research as well. So I think this could well consume the rest of the Q&A time, but I think. Do you want to, I wonder, Carl, do you want to start the ball rolling as Jill maybe pose the question to both you and Anne?
Yeah, thanks, Nick, and thanks, Jill, for the question. I think, of course, innovators and innovation is no stranger to not undertaking formal research. I mean, the commercial sector do it all the time. It's, where would we be without innovation and tech innovation especially? But it is a trade-off, and I think, I'm not sure that tinkering with the trade-off and refining research is the answer, because we're almost at a point where I think if we're really serious about systematically defaulting into fair and rigorous tests of innovation, we almost need to default into consenting and signing up and accrediting people to take part in that, just as almost like a default. So it's like a sort of societal opt-in rather than a societal opt-out. Safe in the knowledge that stuff like data, and I think the machinery is already there, GDP and so on. However, it's the interpretation, and I am no fan of bureaucracy. I'm afraid I'm on record of that. I know it has its purposes and its needs, but I am no fan of it. And I think tinkering with it probably isn't the answer, and we need a much better, stronger led conversation from people who really have the ability to influence policy and shape opinion about a much bigger societal change about opting in by default to innovative. I'm thinking of SDO type stuff around delivery of organisations and services and adoption of technologies and services. So I'm going to pause there. So that's mine, opt-in rather than opt-out as a default, and the mechanisms from organisations, funders and governance to reinforce that. That's my suggestion.
Thanks. Can I move over to Anne, perhaps, on this issue of the kind of the difficulties of conducting research compared to just doing it, kind of?
Yeah, I mean, we had real challenges around kind of ethics and governance, really more the governance than the ethics, actually. And I'm not being critical of people there. I think there were real challenges for all of the organisations in terms of what was going on with the pandemic, their own staff, people being, furloughed and so on and so forth. But I would say it was a completely different experience. I did some research in the swine flu pandemic, and the government mandated a kind of a really rapid turnaround there. That didn't happen this time, and in part that was because I just think the sheer scale of research. I think there was something like 7,000 projects at one point going on, or applications for projects, not all of them funded, that had to be processed. So it was a huge endeavour in a very, very short period of time. But I think there's also a real issue around the governance processes just being not fit for purpose. So for our study, all the trusts had to do was to tweet out a link to the survey. That was it, end of. The clinicians were on board. They were really, really happy to be involved. We had one trust that told us they didn't have capacity and capability. And so we were declined. We couldn't even do the work there. The clinicians were up in arms because they really wanted the data. We had another trust where, despite the big local information pack, and don't even start me on the local information pack because it's completely not fit for purpose for a lot of the research that we as nurses may well do. It's very much designed for CTIMPs, but another trust had its own set of processes, so we kind of had a double whammy there, and they were really slow, and trying to do this really quick turnaround work, it literally did put us in a position where only one out of the 3 organisations was able to participate. The survey had to close, and because of course at that time we kind of didn't know that we were going to have second and third waves, and even in the one that was able to participate, they were very, very late, and we got a very, very small number of participants, even though they were really willing. The chief nurse was totally on board, so it was disappointing, and in a way it almost left me feeling I wish I'd never got NHS sites involved, because from a non-NHS point of view, from our charity partners, we had all our approvals in place in March. We could have started the study right at the beginning of the shielding experience, which is what we wanted to do. And so I think it is difficult. And what worries me is that people may sort of go underground and start calling things audit or service valuation to try and circumvent some of these processes, and that's not what we want at all.
Okay, Rebecca, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I think we're in a different situation because it was very obvious to us that the trusts were protecting their nursing staff by not getting them involved in the study too early on. So they were looking out for their staff. This is going to involve staff taking time out to fill in questionnaires and to conduct interviews. So I think we were quite sympathetic to the fact that the trusts would open up at a time when they felt it was right for their staff. And actually there was some flexibility in that. So yes, we have experienced delays, but the nursing staff in the organisations we're working with and the nursing leads were really keen that this research went ahead. They valued it. They saw the huge benefit of doing this research, and it was just a matter of waiting for the right time, really, where it was appropriate to start the study. So if we're talking about COVID-19, I think it's a different situation for our study, and I don't have any problems with the processes. But more generally, in terms of research outside of a COVID-19 pandemic period, yes, I do think that innovation can be hampered by the research processes, not only the bureaucracy, but sometimes the way you want to deliver an intervention it has to be different because you're doing it as part of a research project. So there are all sorts of things that you have to work around in my area when you're delivering a clinical trial or a cluster randomized control trial compared to just delivering an improvement project. And that can sometimes have an impact on the kind of intervention you're able to deliver and therefore evaluate. But honestly, I could spend 2 days talking about that, so probably best not to get into that now. Thank you.
Thanks. And finally, David, anything to add to this particular theme?
Yeah, everything they said, plus more. So the innovation versus research is a really interesting point. By September, we had a clinical protocol, and we knew there was none for nurses to use. Should we have made it at that point? We've done what we have, but he's asked, can they have it? And they can't, I'm sorry, because if we're to make it widely available, then people in the clinical trial who are in the control group would get it, and that would then diminish any potential impact of the intervention on patient experience. And we might end up with a result that is false, either one way or the other. Probably a false negative result is more likely. So should we have done that? I mean, if we then make the we've got a review, we've got a consensus group, and we've got a survey. It's fairly robust. So should we make that available to people? Or do we risk the Joanna Briggs Institute rejecting that as an option because it doesn't got any outcome data associated with it? I agree with you, Carl. I think that is a question. And if I was to go back again and knew there was a third wave, I'd probably have said, hang the trial. Hi guys, use this because this is developed by nurses for nurses. And I'm in the middle of a trial now, so we can't do that. But as soon as we get to the end of the trial, we will make this available to everybody as an innovation, whatever the result. You make your own mind up whether you want to use it or not.
Thank you. So perhaps prompting us into a kind of change of thinking about the nature of research, things that we perhaps already knew about beforehand, but maybe we'll actually take some action. So that moves us on, and I'll stick with you, David, actually, in terms of the question about, or the comment about non-prioritization of nursing research, if you don't mind. And if we could try and stick in a solution space, that would be great.
I wish, yes. Okay, so when research was being commissioned, and large sums, large millions of pounds of research was being commissioned, they were prioritised by a committee. That committee contained no nurses. It hardly contained any allied healthcare professionals or professions. So decisions were made by people that had no concept of the value of nursing for patients with COVID. They were basically pharmaceutical trials that were commissioned in a rather, as it's found out, vain attempt to find a treatment that could reduce large amounts of mortality and morbidity. Okay, the vaccine trials, don't have a problem with that. Okay, but nurses were telling us that they were really desperate to get involved in this study, but were unable to do so because the committee in charge there locally had said, no, it's not prioritised. So you can't even get in anywhere near to it. And I think it's it's like any discrimination, any institutionalised discrimination. You've got overt, covert, and you've got blindness. All those exist in the NIHR towards research into nursing care, and the solution is that we shout about it a lot.
Okay, Carl?
I'm a little bit more sanguine than Dave. I mean, I think I suspect couching, and this is perhaps the wrong form to say this, but couching some of the system problems as nursing priorities alone does a disservice to the multidisciplinary nature of how we deliver a lot of these services and the questions and solutions. But I also think the reality of the R&I infrastructure is it is geared up for biomedical studies. In a non-pandemic context, the workforce is geared up to deliver drug trials and other forms of trials. And so it's perhaps not surprising that for that limited resource, there was a huge demand, I think, albeit Dave's right, albeit onto a committee that didn't have all of the necessary bodies around a table that should have been there. But nevertheless, there was more demand than there was the ability to supply the capacity, the human capacity to meet that demand. And I think, some studies, did a really good job with the scarce resource that they had. Have we missed opportunities by perhaps not looking wider than some of those biomedical studies? I think probably we have, and I think areas like, and I wouldn't just restrict it to social care, but mental health, social care, nursing, if there's such a, sort of purely nursing priorities, are probably the losers in this, and that will come out in the wash. Can we learn from it and do better? I think we should. I hope we do. I think the chief nursing officer, she's not here today, unfortunately, she can't be there, but this is what we'd like to see advocated and pushed. And, if someone with that force of personality and that network behind them, can't affect that change, then probably we need to ask some really serious questions about how we interact with the NIHR. But I think on balance, it was, as long as we learn the lessons from what had been done, then I'm more sanguine about the response that we had. But it was a crowded field and people having to make terribly difficult choices and prioritise, and it's always tough. There's always going to be losers. So And I was one of those losers. we were commissioned to do a COVID study, and even we couldn't get on the urgent public health portfolio as someone commissioned by public health. So, yeah.
Thank you. Thanks, Carl. Rebecca, do you have any reflections on non-prioritisation of particular aspects of healthcare research?
Yeah, I just think I agree with what Carl just said, that there was some very difficult decisions to be made, and at our own trust, the COVID vaccine trials were being prioritised, and that's where the nursing research resource went. And I'm not sure I would necessarily disagree with that. As a result, we are all starting to gain some level of freedom. But yeah, some difficult choices, and it will inevitably mean that some research that would have been very valuable didn't or couldn't happen.
Thanks. And anything to add, Anne, to that?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I think that there are issues around how, and this isn't necessarily just a COVID thing, around how certain types of research questions, are prioritised, maybe rather than disciplinary stuff. But I certainly think that there is a need for nursing to shout loud about the kinds of what are the issues, what are the priorities for nursing, how do we know what those priorities are? I mean, where are the prioritisation exercises being undertaken in terms of what the most important nursing research questions are, and if we can kind of get those sort of to the fore and shout loud about the need for those to be answered, that will stand us in good stead.
Nick, just one question, I'll come back on this. There are over 80 studies which were prioritised. They weren't all vaccine trials. They should have been prioritised. How many patients were nursed? And there are no studies prioritised for those patients. I think it stands for itself that you don't have to be a nurse to know. You have to be the Prime Minister to know that nursing matters.
Thank you. Thanks for that, David. Contentious subject perhaps, but definitely need for some lobbying. Can I, just for the final kind of round of comments really, absolutely fascinating presentations. Obviously we're talking about COVID-19 here, the research is focused in this space, and I'm just wondering from your own research studies or the studies that you've heard about also today, what kind of things can we generalize, take beyond COVID-19, so the kind of learnings from your own study and take it into more kind of general context. So I'll stick with you, Anne, to start the ball rolling.
I guess from the shielding study, it's thinking around the kind of the impacts where we have situations where people are, for whatever reason, required to reduce or change their activity levels, their social contact levels and what have you, that there are lessons from shielding around how the impacts of that and how that might be managed. And I think sort of wider issues around when these kinds of interventions are brought in, very necessarily brought in, the real importance of getting some insights into the impacts on the individuals who live through them.
Thank you very much. Carl?
I don't have anything to say on this at this juncture. I'm gonna duck out. I think I said enough.
David?
Yeah, it feels quite uncomfortable actually, having tried for several years to get funding to do research into fundamental nursing care, that it took a pandemic to get funding for that. It feels a bit, to say the least, ambulance chasing, but I'm still glad that we've done it, because we found out a lot. And I know that in some of our sites, as we come towards the end of the study, people are rolling out some of these ideas because they're more than required in pandemics. So, yeah.
Thank you. And finally, Rebecca.
I think one of the really interesting things for us in talking about redeployment have been some of the positives, the benefits that are beginning to emerge about redeployment. That if we could do more purposeful redeployments in a non-urgent situation could lead to kind of really long-term benefits. So, staff really understanding the roles of other people because they've worked in different settings. Those people who they might normally find a bit annoying because at the end of the phone they're not necessarily giving them what they want. Now they suddenly understand the pressures that they're under, and there's a different type of communication that goes on. But redeployment tends to happen when obviously units are short-staffed and we need to move staff around, rather than planned, deliberate redeployment for the advantage and development of the person being redeployed. So perhaps if we could learn about some of the positives of being redeployed and emphasise and build on those, we could have more purposeful redeployment for staff development and learning, which would enhance relationships across different groups within an organisation. So that would be one of my key learnings from the work we've done so far, and hopefully that'll continue to build as we do explore the positive side of redeployment, as well as some of the potential difficulties and challenges of redeploying staff.
Okay, thank you. Great learning. Thank you once again to all of our speakers, Anne, Carl, David and Rebecca, for the presentations and for sharing their insights. We'll find now a link in the chat or shortly to an evaluation which will help us in terms of future planning for events like this. Your views are really important to us, and I'd be really grateful if you could take just a couple of minutes. It does take just a couple of minutes. I have trialled it, filling it out with honest feedback, please. Please use the survey also to make suggestions for other topics you'd like to see covered. I hope you found the event interesting and informative. I had the presentations were all new to me today. I also hope you leave the event with a sense of pride in our wonderful profession and a curiosity to get more engaged and involved in research and nursing. Indeed, David opened his hand out as an invitation to be directly involved. So on behalf of the School of Human and Health Sciences at the University of Huddersfield and on behalf of NHS England, I'd like to thank you for coming along today, and I hope to see you again soon. Take care, thank you, and good afternoon.